And in South Africa, there's this enormous backlog of the education during the apartheid era, when it was almost designed not to be effective. Although I was training teachers in the townships at that time, it's now a huge effort to try and do, and this is, I think, a worldwide trend. It's just exacerbated in South Africa because there was this period of poor education. And this is the real problem. It's the sort of problem that one, I think, exists in America with poor schools in poor districts, and in England and probably in most countries of the world. I'm interested in the situation in Somalia. So it's how to actually generate a more positive experience for learners and to actually improve teaching in these schools. And so much effort here, I'll leave probably with this thought, has been put on the curriculum and giving more to teachers in terms of material, rather than actually allowing teachers to have autonomy in their classroom. And that's ultimately, I think, one of the problems. If you have a poorly teacher, he's spoiled, and it doesn't help to just spoon-feed the teacher. So that's the thing, and I think the Egal experience, and John Corlette in particular, was remarkable because he didn't seem to interfere in the classroom. He didn't actually spoon-feed. He was a pretty remote figure in the school, in the actual running of the school, and yet he still had this influence on all of our lives. And he was, I think, very good at dealing with deviant kids and deviant ideas. So his lack of rigidity, I think, was a real plus factor. And perhaps this idea of just being there without being present all the time. I mean, he would sort of lead things from a distance rather than actually. I didn't ever see him in my classroom. I don't think any teacher was inspected or checked. I mean, it would be interesting asking Fritz about that, but he certainly never came in with a clipboard to check whether, what was happening in the classroom was to his liking. He just seemed to believe that his teachers would do what he wanted. And yet he had this extremely powerful philosophy of his about complete education. Yeah, I don't want to dominate this conversation, but there's something to think about anyway.
No, I think you are quite, I'm listening to what you're saying, certainly, we were discussing last night that, you reinforced it that JC or John Corlette was rather a remote figure, but as you said, he had a very powerful influence in the day-to-day affairs of what's going on in the school, but he himself was not physically present in the halls and in the classrooms. And going back to your thing about, in South Africa, or, I think generally in the third world, in Africa, and I found it in India and so on, because I worked with a lot of Indians here in Arabian Gulf, is that to give you one little story or anecdote is in one of our gas plants in the middle of the desert, which is about 200 kilometers from the main city here in Abu Dhabi. In our warehouses, we had these Indian guys working there, and we made a rule that they wear overalls. And when I go over there, I wear overalls myself. It's not, I'm not ashamed to say that I put a pair of overalls and muck about a bit as well. But then, this Indian guy who was, he's a storekeeper or senior storekeeper, because he was educated, he was graduate from one of the universities in Kerala or whatever, and it was for him a shame as an educated Indian to put on overalls. So when when the rule was that that he had to wear overalls during the working hours when he is inside the warehouses, what he would do is he would come in with his nice pressed trousers and shirt, clean white shirt, and he would put on his overalls in the office. And then he will take them off before he goes out of the office to the camp. So nobody sees him, which was a bit stupid, but he thought that nobody should see him wearing overalls outside the work environment because it was sort of degrading to him. And that comes, sorry to bore you guys, but so because he felt as an educated person, it was beneath him. This is something which drivers and laborers and helpers in the warehouses and that's, war. You know what I mean? So, education sometimes can have a negative effect on the person.
And that's an interesting point because we're trying to identify what are the key points in Corlette's system. And one of them was he made sure we all had the same pocket money, more or less, and or at least there were some attempts at something like that. We all had more or less the same, perhaps not uniform, but there weren't distractions the way there are in many schools.
Well, I don't know whether it is coming from the Egal, but I suppose it really must have, But for example, throughout my life, it doesn't really matter to me, for example, in wearing overalls, or for example, I remember one day when I was where I live in Toronto, the garbage collections, the days they come around, when, helping them put the rubbish back in the back of their truck. I was helping them out, and some people got surprised, that I came out of the house and was helping these two guys because there was a lot of, yard rubbish and this and that and so forth, which was outside, and I was helping them, so, I mean, I don't know whether, there is nothing, being a snob or snobbish, or this is beneath me, or I cannot do this, I mean, just, something has to be done, you just get along and do it, at that moment.
So that's house chores around the house. Yeah. In Alpena, we all had a chore.
A chore, yeah.
Yeah. Kumait, I was wondering, what is another thing that comes up in schools is this issue of bullying and clique forming, the cheerleaders versus the athletes versus the nerds. I found that there was less of that at Egal, I think, because of the eating system. When you were there, were you required to eat in a particular place at a table? Were you assigned eating spots?
Yes, we were. And if I remember, they were quite large tables. They were maybe 10 to 12, maybe even more than that, 14, 16 people at the same table. There were long, narrow tables and had people sitting on both sides and at the end.